especially the general liability policy and the professional indemnity policy. May I request Nishant to just highlight about the general liability policy?
Sure, sir, and thank you. So commercial general liability policy has been in the market in India for around 2 decades now. It introduced due to various contracts that Indian clients started to, started rendering services to clients in US and Europe. And that's where the concept of CGL actually started picking up in India. Prior to that, we used to have the public liability and product liability policies on a standalone basis. But in terms of coverage, it's more or less similar. So the genesis is the same. If you talk about commercial general liability policy, it typically would pay for damages. Damages here would mean costs arising or costs claimed by people who are either affected by a bodily injury or there is a property damage to third parties. And these third parties are typically anybody other than the insured. So insured here is defined as the organization for whom the policy is paid, policy is issued, and their employees. So anybody apart from them are third parties. So any claim for damages from third parties for bodily injury or property damage, which is arising due to insured's business operations, that is what is covered under a CGL policy. So when you talk of business operations, it means the insured's premises, the operations that they conduct, their products which are out there in the market and used. So from all these elements, any such injuries and property damage related claims that come in are held under the CGL policy. The policy would have two forms. So you have a claims made form or an occurrence based form. These are defined by how the claims are triggered under the policy. So under a claims made policy, you would have claims paid that are reported in the current policy period and are also originating in the policy period. So and the policy period is extended or it is stretched from the retroactive date. So any claims that fall within the retroactive date and the expiry of the current policy are paid or are picked up in a claims made policy form. While an occurrence based policy form would pay for claims which are the policy which is live at the time of an accident. Whenever the accident would have occurred, at that time whichever policy was live, that policy picks up claims when the policy is issued on an occurrence form. This is just a brief about the types, because these forms are very common in CGL, and how the policy responds would depend on the form at which it is issued. If you look at some of the top exclusions that are there in the CGL policy, employer's liability is not covered. So you wouldn't pay for, the policy wouldn't pay for any claims which are arising due to employment practices, that is, workman compensation kind of a situation is not picked up under this policy. The policy would exclude any losses which happen to the insured's own property, because here the coverage is only for third party property. So insured's own losses are not covered. Pollution is a standard exclusion under the policy. So all costs related to a pollution situation are not covered. However, there's a carve-back available for sudden accidental pollution. So if the event is sudden and accidental in nature, then it can form coverage. Product recall is an exclusion. So any recall related expenses are not covered. However, again, there's a carve-back which is available for product recall, particularly depending on the nature of the product and business. And most importantly, an exclusion which can be seen in CGL policies is for named diseases. These diseases could be, so you will find these exclusion in certain policies, may not find it in certain policies. It depends on which carrier has issued the policy. The exclusion could be for communicable diseases. The exclusion could be for pathogenic organisms. The exclusion could be fungi, mold, etc. So there are certain named exclusions where certain specific ailments are not covered under the policy. This is obviously gaining a lot of prominence in the current situation as well, because there are a lot of inquiries around coverage for COVID-related claims. So this particular exclusion has gained even more prominence today.
Yeah, that's what, in fact, that's the main concern of insured like us. one of the major concerns, in fact, I would like to ask this question to Jyoti as a insurance lawyer. One of the main concerns is, suppose if a client of insured visits a client's office and he or she unfortunately gets COVID positive subsequent to that, whether this general liability policy will be recurring in that, and how such allegation can be established and traced by the by us to see whether it is genuine or not, whether code of law will admit such liabilities, whether or it will come under the exclusion, since you are saying that it is only bodily injury and but COVID is not a bodily injury. So how does from a legal angle this is viewed? Suppose if a person sues the organization, after visiting the organization, he or she has got into this coronavirus.
Thank you, Mr. Vishwanathan, and hello everyone. That's a very interesting question, sir, particularly given that we are dealing with something like this right now. One of the reasons why the government has declared a lockdown is because they don't want COVID to be spread from one place to another and for people to come in contact with each other and contract COVID as a disease. Now, we all know that the reason for COVID is a virus. COVID in itself is nothing but a virus. Now, to answer the question that you are referring to, that when a client visits the office of the insured and contracts COVID, and then claims damages from the insured, will this claim be form part of a CGL policy? I think there are three essential points that we need to sort of look at to answer this question. Point one is whether COVID is a bodily injury. Now, as Jisha mentioned, that a CGL would cover a bodily injury or a property damage. And the definition of bodily injury in CGL policies would usually include a disease or a sickness, in addition to a few other aspects like mental agony, etc. Now, therefore, because COVID is nothing but a viral disease, from a strictly bodily injury standpoint, it is an easy case to say that, okay, COVID is a bodily injury. But the more important question that comes about in this situation is, how will the client prove that he contracted COVID at the premise of the insured? Because we all know that the COVID virus can stay on steel up to 30 days. It can stay on plastic and paper anywhere between 3 days and 10 days, and so on and so forth. So in these circumstances, what will need to be really looked at is how will the claimant, which is the client, prove that he got COVID by visiting the office of the insured. It's going to be a difficult process there, because they will have to show not only the fact that one, he got COVID there, two, that he did not contract COVID anywhere else. Now, looking at the circumstances, it could have been that he contracted COVID while sitting at home. He could have contracted it on his journey. He could have contracted it in the building, but not in the client's premise, or anywhere else in the previous 28 days, approximately. But therefore, I think the second and most important point there will also be to show, or how to show, that the COVID contraction happened at the client's premise. The third and important aspect to note here is also whether the client has taken all the precautions. The insured has taken all the precautions. So for example, if the insured's office is shut since 2 months, he has sanitized the whole area on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis. There are no employees in his office since 2 months at all. Nobody has entered the premise. And if the client is the first person who went in, it's going to be difficult for him to argue that he contracted COVID in that premise, as against anywhere else that he could have contracted it on his way there or throughout his journey or anywhere else. Last but not the least is the exclusions that Jisha was mentioning. Now, if the policy in question is a policy which does not have a named disease exclusion or does not have a communicable disease exclusion, then we are okay. But if there is a named disease exclusion which mentions COVID, then definitely no. And even if there is an exclusion which talks about communicable diseases, it's going to be fairly easy for the insurer to say that COVID is a communicable disease and therefore it is excluded. The third and most important, there are two more exclusions that will need to sort of be looked at in this scenario. There is usually something called as an expected bodily injury. Now, if this happened in, say, January of 2020, perhaps COVID was not an expected bodily injury. But today, as of May 2020, if an office is opened despite the lockdown guidelines, and then I as a visitor enter their premise, knowing very well that COVID is one of the most communicable diseases currently in my city, then it is also possible that the insurer will take up the case of expected bodily injury. Because in today's day, this is an expected bodily injury. And last but not the least, we all know that several reinsurers are trying to introduce the COVID exclusion into the policy. So even that will become very relevant in this scenario, because if we are looking at a policy which does not have the exclusion, then fine, we are only looking at any other exclusion that may create a trouble. But if we are looking at a policy which has incorporated the COVID exclusion, then any loss, damage that may arise on account of COVID, directly or indirectly, is excluded. And in that situation, in my view, from a legal standpoint, it will be difficult to sustain a claim of this nature under the CGL policy. But if this exclusion is not there, from a strictly tenability point of view, I think COVID will fall within the definition of a bodily injury, subject to the other aspects that we just discussed being sort of, covered.
But is such type of exclusion tenable in the court of law?
So now, again, from a tenability standpoint, courts have been fairly clearer and more clear now than before that although an insurance contract is kind of a standard form contract, yet it is a contract, which means the two parties who are in it, which is the insurer and the insured, they decided they want to enter into this contract and agreed to those terms. Now, if the exclusion is already a part of the contract, then it will, in my view, it will be deemed as tenable for the simple reason that the parties have agreed to that contract, agreed to that provision, and agreed to that exclusion. Now, having said that, if there is an insurance policy which is currently in place, so as of 15th of May 2020, and if the insurer tries to introduce the COVID exclusion midway, as an insured, I have the right to not accept it because that is not the contract I entered into, and I have the right to not accept any amendment. So to that extent, yes, if it's a new term, a new exclusion which is being introduced midway into the contract, into the policy, then yes, I see there is a case for the insured to go to the court of law and say that this is not something I accepted. This is not the contract I agreed to, and therefore it should not be held tenable. So whether or not an exclusion of this nature will be held tenable will also depend on whether it was agreed upfront when parties entered into the contract, or was it something that was sort of brought in by one party unilaterally without the other party's agreement. And last but not the least, in today's day generally, we are seeing that courts are taking a softer stand. For example, there have been cases where people are claiming COVID as a force majeure event, or people are trying to seek injunctions on aspects where there were no injunctions ever possible. Yet courts have been slightly more lenient, although the courts are clearly saying that these are not meant to be precedential in value. Please consider the circumstances. I'm giving you this relief as an interim measure because you're suffering from a certain circumstance like COVID and lockdown, etc., etc. So in today's day,
towards whom? Insured or the insurer?
No, I mean insured. I mean insured only. But we have to also remember that if, as I said, if this is something I upfront agreed to, it's going to be difficult for me to argue in May that what I agreed to in January should not be brought into operation. But if this was not agreed to upfront, but then yes, definitely the court will look favorably to the insured to not allow an imposition of an exclusion of this nature.
Okay, I have another issue. See, in the recently we had a gas leakage at the LG Polymers, Vizag. What is being considered as the proximate cause for the accident? Whether it was human error or whether it was a mechanical failure or lockdown. And if it is a lockdown, will it be an admissible claim under CGL policy? This is, I think, Geisha, you may throw light on that.
Sure. So, yes, so we were all hit with this tragedy, and I think it is one of the biggest tragedies in the recent future. And obviously, it has raised a lot of questions along with it, as you rightly mentioned. Now, coming to the first part of your question, which is whether what is the proximate cause of this particular incident? So, current state of the event is such that it is under investigation. So, as per reports, there are, close to 12 people have already suffered death and close to 5,000 people are injured. But what really caused the entire incident is still under investigation. So, the known facts about the case are that the unit was locked down and it was being opened up, there was accumulation of styrene gas within the premises, and there were lapses in terms of the storage of the gas per se, because of which there was gas which got leaked out, and it traveled close to 3 kilometers of perimeter and affected the people and maybe property as well. But the entire set of incident and the cause is yet being investigated. So till that time, I don't think any of us would be very clear in terms of what really caused the event. The second part of the question, whether the lockdown caused it. If we talk of it from an indirect trigger, yes, because the lockdown was because of COVID. So indirectly, maybe there could be some correlation built, but ultimately we'll have to rely on the stand that courts take and how they ultimately view this entire scenario. Coming to the third part, which is the coverage under the policy. So first, from a outside view, it is a accidental event. So there is a situation which is not like a, an expected event. It's an unexpected sudden event. It has caused a explosion. It is, it has caused that leakage and people have injured and there has been damage. It definitely is a coverage element under the CGL policy. Nobody can deny that. So until there are, the time there are facts that there was gross negligence or there were certain other elements which were on play, the policy definitely picks up these kind of scenarios. And from a policy standpoint, there are two sections where you will see trigger. The first is the base coverage, which is bodily injury and property damage. So all damages related to that can be covered. The defense costs which the insured incurs in representing themselves in courts can be covered, and related costs can also be covered. The second part which can be triggered under the policy is sudden and accidental pollution. So we know that there has been a pollution event, but the extent of damage is not clearly known yet. And there would have been costs which have been incurred in stabilizing the situation, that is mitigating the pollution situation, neutralizing the environment, and maybe also correcting the environmental situation. So that is some bit of the costs that could come in from that side. So if the insured or the policy has a sudden and accidental pollution endorsement, the pollution related expenses can also be covered under the policy. So that's the view on the LG Polymer case.
But now I think we are almost 50% of the time. So let's move to the professional indemnity part of it. Can you just explain what exactly professional indemnity cover includes and what are the exclusions? Because people are more worried about in any professional indemnity claim comes means first the insurer will say the exclusions and show you that these are the exclusions, so it is not your claim. You are not eligible for the claim. So if you can just highlight what are its includes and what are these exclusions, inclusions and exclusions.
Correct. I very well understand the pun in your question, but let me also say that PI policies, have also traveled good number of decades now, and the forms which are available in the market today are quite broad, and coverage actually depends on which form is in question. So leaving that aside, so a PI policy typically would pay for losses, and here losses are financial losses. So the CGL, when we were talking about bodily injury, property damage, there is a financial element. The base trigger is bodily injury and property damage. Here the base is financial losses which are incurred or which are claimed from the insured by third parties, obviously, for any wrongful acts while rendering their professional services. Now, wrongful act is a broad term. What it actually means is any act, of neglect or error or omission or failure to perform. These kind of scenarios by the insured, which leads to a loss to their clients, to their customers, and because of which, if the customer is claiming damages, that is what is covered under a PI policy in a very, very simple format. And as I said, depending on which profession, depending on which policy form, there are pluses and minuses to this as well. Who would typically need a PI policy? You will have all kinds of professions. So we have traditional professions like, obviously we're seeing a lot of doctors, hospitals, healthcare in prominence in today's situation as well. So these are the segments. Plus you have CAs, CAs, consultants, you have management consultants as well, engineers, architects. So the traditional forms of setups which have been rendering services. Come to more of the newer era. So you have your BFSIs. So we have banks and financial institutions, which includes your insurance companies, brokers, so on and so forth. And also the third leg of it, which is the ITITS companies. You have your e-commerce, you have digital companies. So the entire ambit of service and profession is the one who can actually purchase this policy and protect themselves against such kind of claims. What is not covered? We still have to touch it. So typically what is not covered is an insolvency, liquidation or bankruptcy related loss. We know that there will be losses because of this kind of a situation, but it doesn't form within the ambit of a PI policy. Contractual liability. So this is a term which should be understood very clearly. I'll explain it a bit, and later probably through questions we'll understand that. So contractual liability, as per a PI policy, what will not be covered is any assumed liability or anything which the insured takes upon themselves as part of the contract, which would have otherwise not attached to the insured from a legal standpoint, from a civil liability standpoint. So only that part is not covered. Apart from that, even if the contract stipulates certain things, but those things would have anyway attached to the insured, even if there was a contract or no contract, those kind of losses are paid under the PI policy. Any prior acts and prior claims are not covered. We see, clients ask us when they're purchasing a policy, would you cover my past situations, which maybe they'll render a loss now. Can we cover it? We can't. So the policy will not pick up anything which happened prior to the policy purchase. And bodily injury and property damage, we said it's covered under CGL, it's not picked up under PI. However, there are professions where the loss will be first triggered through a bodily injury or property damage. So for example, a healthcare or a hospital, you know that there will be a bodily injury before an actual financial thing coming up on the hospital. In such a situation, there is a carve-back which is given for BIPD, depending on, as I said, the profession. Wherever it is an integral part of the service, it is given. So that's an overview of the PI policy.
Yeah, the question is with respect to chartered accountants, especially since you said about that. See, the current scenario, what happened is, in India, our financial year is on 31st of March 2000. Every year, financial year ends on 31st March. And generally what happens is listed companies are required to finalize their accounts and adopt it, and then inform the stock exchange before the 45 days. This time, of course, they have extended, but still many companies have already come out with their results. Okay, the auditors have already signed the balance sheet, etc. When I talk to some of the auditors, the only worry they have, one of the important worry they have is, see, the normal course of audit, they actually physically come into the premises of the client. They will audit. In addition to, although in these days, most of the things are on the electronic form, in addition to what is available in the electronic form, they normally look at some physical documents and some, but see here, they didn't get that opportunity to do that. They have finalized the balance sheet. Okay, later on, if it is discovered that for some reason, some material aspect has been missed out, and that became a, say, price sensitive information, and because of that, it is particularly a company which is listed company, suppose if its price falls, and the investors, if they sue the auditor that you have not taken due care in terms of certifying the accounts, and I have relied fully on your certified balance sheet, and you are responsible for the loss which you have incurred. Somewhat similar to the class action suit which shareholders can make on our directors or the company. Similar thing they can also sue the auditors for that. So how does legally, how does it work, and can the auditors PI policy can trigger in such a case if the damage comes to him? Can they get it compensated by the professional indemnity?
Right. So, in fact, this is a very timely question, sir. As you correctly said, we've just passed March, and COVID problems sort of started around 23rd, 24th. So,
Yeah.
just to elaborate on the question, we can look at it in two angles. For question number one, if there is an impact on the share price, or if the shareholders believe that the audit certification by the auditor has led to a loss for them, can they sue the auditor? The answer is yes. They can take a direct action or they can take a derivative action on behalf of the company. Usually in India, we see that the company itself will sue the auditor, but that doesn't mean the shareholders cannot. Now, having said that, there are two kinds of actions that may usually come out of this. One would be if the shareholders sue the company for the wrongful disclosure, because at the end of the day, although the auditors have certified whatever has been certified, the fact is the disclosure was made on the company's letterhead, basis which the public has reacted to it. So a potential class action, as you correctly said, does lie there. But the class action will not be covered under a PI policy. Any claim connected to the class action will be covered under the DNO policy that the company takes for its directors and officers. That is part one. The second part is, now there are two possible actions against the auditors under these circumstances. One is if the shareholder decides to sue the auditor on behalf of the company, because the contract would usually be between the auditor and the company. So shareholders will act on a derivative basis, acting on behalf of the company, and sue the auditors. Now that claim will get caught under the auditor's PI policy, for the sheer reason that in this case it's a negligent claim. Now what is important here again is usual negligence, error, omission would get covered under a typical PI policy. But if there is any chance that the auditor has intentionally created wrong paperwork for whatever reason, whether to gain wrongfully or to cause wrongful loss, whatever may be the intention behind, if there is a dishonest or a misconduct related element attached to that wrongful certification, then there is an exclusion that can get attached to this particular claim. Usually PI policies, we see that in many wordings, we see a dishonest conduct exclusion. That can get attached if there is any possibility of the auditor having purposely or intentionally done this act of wrong certification. That is part one. Part two is the company suing the auditor, not the shareholder, but the company itself. Now they can also sue the auditor, and in that circumstance also, it is the PI policy of the auditor which will come to the rescue, as long as the auditor is able to show that the allegation is of a negligent act and not of a dishonest conduct. Now, even if there is an allegation of a dishonest conduct, depending on the wording of the policy that the auditor has taken, the point in time when the coverage will stop depends. So just to give you an example, many wordings will say that dishonest conduct is excluded, but dishonest conduct will need to be proven by a court of law, which means till the time a court doesn't say that yes, the auditor was dishonest, the coverage will continue to attach. But there are also policies which don't have this provision in that sense. They will simply say dishonest conduct excluded. Now in this scenario, the insurer has the ability to say that your allegation pertains to a dishonest conduct. My policy excludes dishonest conduct. Therefore, I'm not able to pay. So ultimately, the short answer for this, whether a claim of this nature is supposed to be covered under PI policy, answer is yes, it's a tenable claim, subject to there being no excluded allegation. And secondly, the clear wording of the policy will come into play to decide at what point in time the intention of the auditor gets tested to determine coverage.
Just to add to what Jyoti mentioned, because she touched the point on dishonest acts and conduct, there are few dimensions to that as well. So a conduct from a broad basis, if the entity per se has acted in a dishonest frame, the policy obviously will become void. But if the dishonesty or the dishonest act is limited to a person or one employee who was under whatever influence and ended up doing a dishonest act, the policies do have a provision to cover fraud and dishonesty, particularly perpetrated by employees. So there is a callback available. again, we'll come back to the same point that whether the policy has that endorsement or not will ultimately define coverage. But there is a provision to cover PI claims arising out of dishonesty of employees, as long as these are by a limited set of employees, not by the entity per se. So, so to say, the conduct exclusion that you just explained will definitely be there, just that there is a carve-back available for a small part of it.
Right, and there are also policies which will have something called as severability of exclusions,
Perfect.
which will come into play in such a scenario, where
Absolutely.
one employee's misconduct or dishonest conduct will not be attached to another employee's ability to claim, rather another employee, and therefore automatically at the entity level, it will not be imputed. It will not be automatically sort of sent upwards.
Absolutely.
See, there are professional indemnity is used by several even corporates. Say like ours, I am coming from BFSI, Banking and Financial Services. We are to broking and custodian function. As a broking and custodian function, we have to settle trades which are of huge volume on a daily basis. So the settlement of trade involves two aspects. One is the security aspect, another one is the fund. For fund, invariably we have to look to the banks, any commercial bank for transfer of funds. And a situation might happen that we have given the instruction, but bank has not given the instruction. As a result, it has not reached either the end. Either it has to, the fund has to go to the clearinghouse or to go to the client. If it is not reached to any one of, if it doesn't go to the clearinghouse, it will result in an auction in a this thing, typical stock market situation. If it doesn't go to the client loses money because he cannot invest that money. So he might sue the custodian or the broker for that. In such type of situation, in the normal course, whether it will be covered under the PI policy, one. And number two, if we have given the instruction, if the bank has not given the instruction, whether bank's policy will be triggered, whether we can sue the bank and bank can play us from that. Number two is if this has happened due to this lockdown situation, where it is an extraordinary situation, where neither us nor bank has got sufficient number of people to actually follow the instructions, etc. So whether in such type of situation, whether PI policy, if we invoke any of us, either the custodian or a broker or a bank invokes it, whether it will be acceptable by the insurer or legally.
Correct. So, the question that you posted is a principally a PI situation. Now, what defines performance or non-performance? First of all, is the contract between parties. The contracts that you have with your bankers for the services that they render to you, the contract that you have with your clients on the service that you render to them, so on and so forth. Now here we are talking about multiple situations. One is an error situation where the error or the misjudgment happened at your end, that is your entity. And in such situations, any losses that will come up are attributed to the negligent acts that has happened because of you. So in such case, your PI policies would fundamentally respond to pick up those kind of claims. You spoke about the second situation where what recourse would you have against the bank? Now that also depends on the contract that you have with the bank for rendering your services. So if in case there are clauses where obviously there will be clauses for non-performance or delay in performances, etc., and also for third-party losses, basis those clauses, you can actually file litigation or you can ask for damages as per your regular business dealings, basis the contract. Whether your PI policy will pick up any, part of the expense that you will incur in making this claim against the banker, the policy doesn't have a provision to, to initiate a litigation from your end to a third party. In this case, your vendor. So the policy doesn't have that provision. So the policy can cover expenses or losses for a PI claim onto you. So all the claims which the first part that we just discussed, where the clients are claiming against you for a negligent situation for which they incurred losses, can be picked up by the PI policy. The third part of it, in a lockdown situation, what are the kind of things or impact that we could see on contracts? there are multiple. Because you look at a contract, it would typically be created to operate in a regular scenario. While today we suddenly have a absolutely unprecedented situation. There are clauses in the contract which are designed specifically to cater these kind of situations. These are a force majeure clause or act of God clause, etc., which can come to your aid in case of an absolute non-performance. But that also depends on the way the clause is worded, what is considered as a force majeure or an act of God, and whether the current situation can fall under that or not. Now, if we come to a more realistic picture that we are seeing today, in most organizations, the business operations have not gone 100% off. There are few industries, but beyond that, most industries have found out an alternate way or mechanism to still render the services to their clients through work from home situations or an alternate supply chain, so on and so forth. And they're operating at a reduced capacity. In some cases, 50, 40, 30, 20, whichever, but they are operating at a capacity. And they are engaging in frequent discussions with their clients to see whether they can still continue with the previous contract, or do they need to modify the terms and conditions of the contract so that the services can be rendered as per the reality of today, because the situation has changed for you, for the partners as well, and everybody is aware of it. But these are actions which can be taken: reviewing the contracts, redoing the contracts, looking at the the newer business model that you have now started operating with, and how can you render that particular contract based on this newer way of operations, and have contracts which truly reflect that. So that's how we can probably broadly look at addressing this. From a policy standpoint, yes, for any act, error, or negligence that would have happened at your end because of which there is a loss to your clients, the PI policy will respond. And it will typically pay the financial losses. It will also pay defense costs. In case you end up appointing a legal entity to defend yourself, the policy will also pay for that.
As a corollary to this, if suppose there is a contractual ceiling which has been entered, there is a ceiling on the contract that the loss can be up to a maximum of certain amount. And if a litigation has taken place, and if it has gone to the court, and the court has decreed that amount which is much higher than the contractual mutual contract, then whether the policy, as long as it is within the total overall policy limit, whether the insurer will be able to reimburse it, will they reimburse the amount?
Correct. So
even though there is a contractual, it exceeds the contractual limit.
Correct. So if we typically look at PI claim situations, and the first step, as you said, most claims are not litigated because you have an ongoing relationship with the clients, and most of the claims are settled without litigation. In
Correct.
such situations, it's the contract limits which are held benchmark, and that becomes the basis of all kinds of negotiations and discussions for claim settlement. But in this particular case where you said where the client is unhappy with the settlement and they have taken it to courts, and there is a civil judgment which is now directing you to pay beyond the contractually agreed limit. In such a situation, the policy, if you look at a PI policy form, there is no limitation which would stop policy payment just because the contract was for X amount. The policy is not limited by the contractual quantums. Instead, it would look at the policy sum insured. As long as the policy sum insured is available for payment, the policy should respond, unless there is something which is contrary, which generally is not there in PI policies.
I think there's just one thing that I want to add there. This all is perfectly all right. The only problem actually arises when contractually the insured has undertaken to pay like a liquidated damage or an indemnity. So in that situation, it also falls within the sphere of a contractual liability assumed, which otherwise would not attach. So as Jisha was mentioning in the beginning of the introduction to PI policy, one of the exclusions in a PI policy is a contractual liability assumed, which may otherwise not exist. Which means if the insured has assumed a contractual liability, which he would otherwise in law not be liable to pay, then that something kind of a liability.
You mean to say something like an excess clause in this case?
Yes, something like a liquidated damage. So for example, in many contracts, particularly commercial contracts, parties enter into specific clauses which say that if you delay by 1 month, 15% of the total value will need to be paid as liquidated damages, right? Now, or sometimes you may agree on 50% or 75%, depending on what is the commercial understanding. Now, if under law, the liability was not going to be that much, if the legal liability of the insured in that situation was not going to be 15% or 50% as agreed, it was only going to be 5%. Now, that is the balance 10% is a contractual liability the insured undertook, for which in law there was no liability. Now, in that scenario, an insurance company, at least basis what I have seen, is an insurance company may argue that, this part of your liability is a contractually assumed liability, and therefore we may not pay. So it as Jisha said, it may not necessarily have anything to do with a contractual cap, but it can have an interface with any contractually assumed liability.
Agreed.
But if the contractual obligation is not, suppose they are not able to meet, the insured is not able to meet because of this lockdown or COVID pandemic, etc., then that case still will the force majeure clause will be applicable, or this will be treated as an exceptional situation, and then the insurer will be paying for the insurance.
I think as far as a force majeure, and Jisha would be much better positioned to answer this from an insurance standpoint, but from a contractual standpoint, whether or not the force majeure applies will depend on the wording of the contract. First point is whether COVID or general words like epidemic, disease, etc. are included in the contract within the force majeure clause. If they are included, then yes, the parties can treat COVID as a force majeure, and then they can decide as per the contract what needs to be done. So to give you an example, sir, for example, there are many contracts where parties agree that upon invocation of a force majeure, the obligations will be suspended by 90 days or 120 days or whatever is the commercial understanding. There are also contracts which allow parties to terminate in case there is force majeure. So depending on what is the language used for force majeure, COVID can be brought into the definition of force majeure. Now, in fact, yesterday, the finance minister has declared that for purposes of RERA, which is the Real Estate Development and Regulation Act, COVID will be treated as a force majeure. So there we are not even waiting for a court judgment. There will be an amendment on RERA, and that will come into play as it is. Now, as far as contracts are concerned, we are seeing cases where COVID is being used as a force majeure, where the language of the contract is very wide, which says action which is beyond the control of parties, or it uses words like pandemic, epidemic, etc. In fact, the government of India in February declared that for the purposes of public procurement contract, which is with the government, the COVID situation in India and any other country will be considered as force majeure. It's deemed as natural calamity, but for public procurement contracts. So as far as private contracts are concerned, it is more driven by the language of the contract. And yes, if I invoke force majeure under my contract and I suspend operations, and if that results in any particular claim, then that again is something that needs to be looked at from the point of view of a contractual liability. Because if the claim only arose because of the force majeure clause, then it's a contractually assumed liability. But if the claim arose, which would have anyway arisen, whether or not the force majeure clause was there, then, as Jisha said, the PI policy would usually attach.
Just to make it a, just saying, attaching a few more comments to that. So, sir, when we say force majeure, it's basically a contract thing that you have, the insured has with its clients. Insurance is not part of that primarily. Insurance comes into picture when you are sued by your customers or when they actually raise requests for damages. Then that is when the insurance comes into picture. And what the PI policy to look at is that, did you render a service? Did you fail to render a service because of certain operations? So you will be following protocols, etc. And there, because of any negligence, this particular situation arose. That's when the policy triggers. In a COVID situation, it could trigger because when you're working, at a suboptimal level and you are working in a different scenario, there is a possibility that insureds might miss out on some element. Just the fact because we are not working in the old or the regular setup, there can be situations. For that, the policy is there. It is ready to pick up those kind of situations. But just the fact that, somebody is not able to render a service absolutely because there was a shutdown, the policy doesn't get automatically triggered for that kind of a situation.
There's a difference between shutdown and the COVID pandemic. So suppose if some place, so you said that COVID pandemic may be included as of now, but later on there could be an exclusion. But shutdown is something which has happened because of the governmental decisions to, avoid COVID being spread. So there should not be a hair splitting of these two words, and people should say that yes, this is COVID is allowed, and this has happened because of the shutdown, and this is not allowed. Will that be taken from the what is your legal view on this, Jyoti?
Yeah. So I think we need to. In fact, what Jisha mentioned is what I'm going to borrow from very directly. There is COVID, lockdown, shutdown, etc. Those are angles and aspects to be considered between two contracting parties. We're not talking insurance at this point in time. We're talking about the service provider under a PI policy and the service receiver. So the insured will be the service provider and whoever is receiving the services. In that contract, if pandemic is mentioned, or then COVID will be covered. If a government order is mentioned, we have seen so many contracts, especially on leave and license basis, where the force majeure clause is so wide. It talks about not only pandemic and epidemic, it also talks about government orders restricting access to premise. Now, this cannot get wider than this ever. Now, today, my inability to access a particular premise is good enough for the licensee to open up the force majeure clause. Now, as far as that contract is concerned, in these circumstances, COVID, lockdown, etc., triggers the force majeure, and the parties to the contract get the benefit of it. Now, if one of the parties there takes the benefit, doesn't perform at all, takes the benefit under the contract and doesn't perform, ideally, no claim should arise at all, because that's a contractually agreed situation. That if a force majeure happens, you and I both will stop work for 3 months or whatever amount of time. Despite this, if the other side raises a contention that there has been a non-performance, then usually PI policies would cover negligence, but there are errors and omission policies where omissions are also covered. So where your failure to perform is also covered. So that's where, as Jisha was mentioning, we need to see the policy wording to see whether it is restricted to negligence in performance of professional services, or does it also cover error and omission in performance of professional services. If omission is covered in the policy, then non-performance, any allegation for non-performance, that kind of a claim may also be found tenable under a PI policy. So that kind of a differentiation will need to be made.
Right. And at the end of it, it will boil down to specific insured. How did they respond to the situation? How did they, what were the, the alternate ways and mechanisms that they could build and operate with? What did the industry per se in which they were operating did? How did they operate? How did the insured vis-a-vis the industry perform, etc. So there will be a lot of, analysis around that, and ultimately basis all of this inferences is whether you could, whether the policy responds, not responds, to what extent it will respond, etc. will become much more clearer.
My another question is, banks and financial institutions, they are all authorized agencies for collecting government revenues, taxes, stamp duty, and so many other government revenues. Now, they have each government, sometimes it's the state government which sets the time limit for it. Sometimes it is the central government which sets the time limit. Each government has got, generally it is a T+1 or T+2 time. Now, in the current situation where the lockdown is there, where each of these institutions, maybe although they are considered essential service, they may be operating with a skeleton staff. They may not be able to cope up with the time which has been contracted for. The government immediately, by default, they give you the penalties. Can this PI policy can take up the penalties in this case?
So typically PI policies would exclude fines and penalties. That's an exclusion under the policy. However, the intention is not just to not pay. So I think in this situation, as you know, as Jyoti also touched that point from a government standpoint, because governments are taking a liberal view of the situation. So if it is a situation where there is no possibility to perform within a stipulated time frame, it has to be first taken up with the authorities to see any kind of leniency that can be built into the entire operating model, because then it is not just related to one entity, it affects the entire industry. And it has to be actually viewed at that level. From an insurance standpoint, fines, penalties are typically outside the scope of a PI policy unless somebody has specifically agreed to cover a part of it. So there could be policies where there has been a carve-back which has been given, and then in that case it has to be evaluated like a proper PI claim in terms of the fundamentals basis, and then the PI fines and penalties could be picked up.
Okay, then there are a lot of questions from the participants. I think let's take some few questions. I think Chaitanya may be in a position to. Hello?
Yes, so Chaitanya will come online.
Yes, sir. I think we'll take a couple of quick questions in terms of, looking at the time constraints also. Just an assurance to all the participants that whichever questions have not been answered online will be taken offline and would be answered. We are picking up a few questions here. One of the questions is there a possibility that the courts can come out with a generic clause that COVID is force majeure to avoid multiple cases?
I think I will take this.
Yeah.
Okay, so while it's a how do I say, it's extremely good thought, but I don't foresee that courts will declare COVID as a force majeure generally, for the simple reason that while I agree completely that in the history of, I think, mankind, I can say that COVID has affected maximum number of countries and individuals across the world, no doubt. Still, how COVID can impact me can be very different from how COVID can impact, say, Jisha or Elvisa. So for a court to come out and say that COVID is a force majeure altogether, in all circumstances, irrespective of contractual obligation, irrespective of industry, irrespective of nature of contract, it will be difficult. What we do foresee is that courts may declare COVID as a natural disaster or as a pandemic or as an epidemic, so that so that contracts where these words have been used, automatically COVID will form within the definition of force majeure. For example, how government has declared COVID as a force majeure for RERA. So only for that purpose. Such limited interpretations we can definitely expect from the court of law. But a generic whole spread concept that, okay, COVID under all circumstances will be force majeure, that's a difficult case to arrive at. We don't foresee that happening.
Would they be having a safety net just in case these cases are dismissed, Jyoti?
It depends. Ultimately, court systems will still function the way it usually was functioning from a hierarchy standpoint. So, for example, if I go to a high court and my case is dismissed, I have the ability to appeal to Supreme Court. And ultimately, Supreme Court decisions is binding on the entire court system in the country. The only option left from a Supreme Court is for a higher reference within Supreme Court. So let's say a 2-judge bench decides a case and you still want to fight it. Upon your request, the judges can refer it if they feel that there is a question that requires a larger bench reference. But apart from that, the normal hierarchy that works of what judgment prevails on whom, that is still the same. That has not impacted. So High Court rejection can go to Supreme Court, but after the final judgment of Supreme Court, there is no other option.
The next question is, Jisha, from an underwriting standpoint, if she could, help us giving some examples of vicarious liability under professional indemnity following COVID-19, this current global pandemic.
Sure. So I'll pick a simple example for the benefit of understanding, and we'll pick something which is very close to us right now. So we have hospitals and healthcare institutions responding to the pandemic scenario, and they would typically have a PI policy that protects their overall professional negligence. Now, if you pick a situation where the hospitals, because of the situation, have also are getting associated with probably some of the individual doctors or freelance doctors or certain other kind of healthcare providers, just to be able to keep up with the current requirement or the increased surge of medical assistance that is required, they might end up employing a lot of people who traditionally may not be associated with the hospital. Now, these could be medical equipment related entities, these could be individual doctors, these could be healthcare providers, so on, any kind of service providers. Now, while these people are rendering their services, conducting tests, so on and so forth, if there is, though they may not be permanently associated with the hospital, I would say, still they're rendering service on behalf of the hospital. Okay. And because of that, if there is a situation where a patient gets further injured and there is a claim, then would the PI policy of the hospital pick it up or not pick it up? So if the claim is on the hospital, irrespective of the test being conducted maybe by an ABC, which is using the hospital premises and on the instructions of the hospital is performing or rendering its services, will the hospital be liable to pay for it or not? So if the claim is on the hospital for a service which is provided by any of its sublets or subcontractors or those from that frame which could attach to the hospital, just the fact because they have arranged for the rendering of these services, and because of that the situation has come up. So this is called a vicarious situation where the hospital may not be primarily rendering the service, but it is helping an ABC service to reach to the customer, and because of their involvement in the entire situation, they are vicariously associating themselves to the situation. And would the PI policy pay for it? It does. It does pick up vicarious liabilities unless some policies specifically exclude, which I've generally not seen. Jyoti, you would want to add to this?
Actually, this is a perfect example of a vicarious liability in today's sort of circumstances. And again, the point here would also be whether or not they were vicariously liable. Of course, one argument that the hospital may want to take in future is that they didn't have a relationship of vicarious liability. And then it'll reach a court to decide whether in such a situation, the hospital was or was not vicariously liable. Because we need to recognize that this is not normal. What happens is when hospitals and doctors are trying to engage with each other to help mankind, they may not look at the legalities in so much detail. But when it goes to court, this will become very relevant. But apart from that, exactly what Jisha said, that the determining factor will ultimately be on the relationship of the hospital and the healthcare workers or providers, doctors, etc.
There's another interesting question which has come up on online sites. You know, there are various professionals like medical, chartered accountants who actually give online consulting. So can you discuss claim scenarios given the current context, if there's something which comes top of the mind?
I think now if I'll start with this. So you can have lawyers, you can have doctors. In fact, I think I can say this, I can use the name because I'm a member. I think there are several gym institutions who are coming up with video consultation for doctors, if I'm not mistaken, leading gym series. So what they, now in that situation, if you read the terms and conditions very carefully, there they have actually said that this is the personal view of the doctors, and the people who are casting those videos on their website are not responsible. Now in this situation, what will happen is if I am consulting that doctor and let's say they ask me to take a medicine and I take it and then I'm suffering from side effects, who will I sue? If I try to sue the gym series who put up the video, they will show me their legal terms and conditions where they have disclaimed liability altogether. I don't have a contract with the person whose video I was watching. So you see, in law, we are going to face such problems also. And ultimately, in tort, I may be able to claim against the doctor because he at least posed like a doctor. He represented to me that he was a medical professional, enabled to give me advice. And in that scenario, if I claim from that person, his medical PI policy will get triggered. So the way to also look at is whether I will be able to successfully make a claim in law against the doctor. And if that answer is yes, then the doctor will be able to make a claim under their PI policy.
And since we're talking about e-commerce, would just like to highlight one of the recent developments was the Consumer Protection Act, the new version which recently got implemented. And if you note the clauses of the act, particularly e-commerce entities have been brought under the ambit of consumer protection, and they are held responsible in terms of, one of the examples that you mentioned, like, if you're rendering any kind of product or service through your platforms, a liability from the consumers can attach to them either individually or as a class as well, because there is also a provision for class action lawsuits. So they are exposed, and they will have to prepare themselves from a perspective of meeting with the regulations also. So each of these industries, whether it is pharma, whether it is an FMCG, or whether it is apparel, all of them have got their own set of regulations also. And e-commerce cannot escape from those ambits just because they are not in a brick and mortar format and an e-commerce. They have to abide to that, and there are specific rules and guides which are given for e-commerce as well. So they have to make sure that they are operating within the ambit of this, because otherwise there are properly defined laws where they will end up being responsible, and they will end up defending themselves.
It's actually interesting that Jisha mentioned the Consumer Protection Act, because now the very Consumer Protection Act has a concept of consumer, provided it's a service for consideration. If it's ex gratia, then it's not, I'm not a consumer and I cannot complain. Now, in the very example that I was taking, what sometimes happens is that the website takes the money, but the service is being provided by another human being because it takes you to an external link. So the person who's providing the service is not taking the money, and the person taking the money is not providing the service. So it'll be interesting to see how Consumer Protection Act caters to a situation of this nature, where a technical loophole seems to be emerging.
Yeah. But we should be glad that there are provisions that are getting created now.
Yes,
because
definitely.
Before this, I didn't see a clause where there were class action provisions for affected class. At least in India, for consumers, there was nothing.
Absolutely. With the increase in sheer increase in e-commerce, this was highly required.
Yes.
Yes.
Invariably, in a e-commerce kind of a situation, either the website gets sued or the bank gets sued, but there is an intermediary between them. That is a payment gateway.
Payment gateway.
The payment gateway, if they don't give the money to the end recipient who is supposed to receive it, they are not in the picture. So no one, neither the end consumer knows it, or the person who is actually delivering it, my merchant knows about it. So this is one intermediary who escapes all the legal eyes.
That's why it's very important to look for the parties inter se to look at their contracts carefully. So for example, the contract between the website and the payment gateway and the bank. Because if those contracts are not very tight and, in terms of comprehensive, then as you correctly said, sir, there is a very huge loophole that the payment gateway can exercise, because they don't face the customer. So they're not technically liable under such acts, consumer driven acts at least.
I guess we'll take one last question. This is for Jisha. This is from the construction industry. Given that we are in a lockdown state currently on a pan-India basis, do you see developing claim scenarios, given that, there may be quite a few claims coming up in the construction policies, errors?
I missed your voice, Chaitanya, for a while.
Yeah, we missed your voice.
Sorry. I just said that given the current scenario in terms of the lockdown and in the construction industry, there would be a lot of claim scenarios that would develop, given that we are in a state of lockdown with respect to design defects. So how do you see that developing from a claim point of view?
Correct. So, a couple of scenarios that we discussed on the PI. So, though we are talking of a different industry, the underlying facts would stay the same. So here again, it is dependent on the contracts that the construction companies have with their clients. These could be corporates, these could be government, either ways. And what is stipulated in the contract. Like, Jyoti gave the example of RERA, where this is being treated as a force majeure and there are rights available for all parties, and it's their news as well that they will extend the time frame of delivering the projects, etc., so on and so forth. So a lot of things have happened there. How are the contracts in this sector or for this particular client? How are they designed? What are the clauses? Is there provision of force majeure? If so, then yes, they could probably find some respite through that. If not, then whether something has already seeped in or some kind of damages have seeped in into the project is something which you can't determine from the face of it right now. So the project will still have to follow the protocol as and when the lockdown opens up. There will be inspections, etc. And from a PI policy standpoint, there are a couple of provisions. So you have traditionally you will have coverage for absolute claim triggers, which is like claim from the party it could be due to delay, it could be due to any kind of other defect in the project, etc. The policy responds depending on as all the clauses that we discussed. The other thing is mitigation. If you look at a PI policy for construction, there is also a coverage which is available for mitigations. So if midway, now at the time of opening up, based on the review of the project, if we are able to identify that there are small issues that have come up and we can correct it by maybe ABC by spending few whatever amount, then the policy could also be triggered under the mitigation segment and can be reviewed. But again, if you look at some of the policies which are issued now, there is an express COVID exclusion even under PI policies. So if we are talking of a policy with exclusions, then it might not trigger. But if it's an ongoing thing and there are no exclusions, then there is no absolute denial of coverage, but it can be reviewed. And there are multiple options available for coverage, especially from a construction standpoint. So I think mitigation is something which will be very, very relevant for construction projects.
Wonderful. Spoken like a proper underwriter. Thank you. Over to you, Aruna.
Thank you so much. I'm sure today's topic is something where even if we go beyond the time, people would not mind. And it's a very interesting topic. And the conversation that LV sir was managing with Jisha and Jyoti was beautifully done. And Chaitanya added a lot of factors by managing the question and answers. I'm sure you missed most of the questions Chaitanya and people are actually looking forward for. So I'm sure from JB Boda Academy's email ID, we should answer back to them all the questions that we have missed today. On this note, I would like to thank each one of you for your valuable contribution today. Today's webinar was well appreciated across the way the comments we are receiving. I'm receiving some messages over the WhatsApp. So it's incredible. Thank you so much. On this note, I would like to invite our Group Vice Chairman, Mr. Gautam Boda. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Aruna. Good evening, everyone. Today, as we unveil season 2 of our webinar series, on behalf of JB Boda Group and the audience, I'm totally humbled and delighted with the presence of Mr. Vishwanathan, our lead speaker for the day, for blending the concept of underwriting and the legality thereof with our co-panelists, Ms. Jisha Josh and Ms. Jyoti Krishnan, respectively. When planning an event such as this, it is imperative to gain the participation of experts in the field, and we are fortunate to have you all with us. Your willingness to share your time and expertise in the areas of professional and general liability was critical to the success of this event. I also wish to appreciate the efforts put in by our team, led by Mr. C.R. Vaidya, Senior Executive Director and Head Liability at JB Boda. We are gracious to see our webinar series being appreciated by you all. This motivates us to organize more interactive events, and we sincerely look forward to your support. Please stay tuned with us for future events. Once again, thank you very much for joining us today evening. Take good care, stay safe, and thank you again. Over to you, Aruna.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, I need a closing comment. So I'll do one thing. First, I'll come to LV sir. What is the closing comment from your side, sir?
My closing comment will be if any of the insured at the moment, if they have not looked at the insurance wordings, please go back, look into your wordings, see what are the exclusions, delete all the exclusion, try to negotiate with your insurer and delete as many exclusions as possible, especially the COVID, pandemic, and lockdown, all should not become a part of the exclusions. So be careful, stay safe by insuring it. If you have not insured, please go and take an insurance immediately. JB Boda probably would be helping you in this.
Oh, thank you so much. Jisha, what about you?
Yes, this is a difficult situation. It will invoke a lot of claims and there will be a lot of questions, a lot of discussions. But I think as partners to this entire exercise, we are here to partner with all of you to understand, because we're talking of business models evolving, changing, and we definitely see a lot of long-term impact that COVID is going to have on the way businesses are run. So when we say that, the risks are changing as well. What worked for you yesterday will not work for you. We've seen that it is not working for you today, and it will not work for you in the future also. So I think a lot more discussion and engagement is required, and we look forward to all kind of engagements with each one of you to really understand your risks and build you or give you coverages which are relevant and which could help you in situations like this. That's a message from my end.
Thank you so much. Jyoti, yes, what is your closing comment?
I think Mr. Vishwanathan and Jisha have already covered everything that I wanted to say, but let me just quickly summarize. I think I have three sort of comments to make only. One is we need to see what is our contractual obligation and either perform or try and commercially negotiate to see that we are not in breach. That should be the primary aim. If there is a breach, please inform your insurer because the claim is right around the corner. And last but not the least, please take expert advice. Engage with your broker, engage with your insurer, engage with your lawyers to make sure that you get the correct advice at the right point in time. Because in my experience, half the case is built in the beginning, not in the end. So the sooner you engage with the expert, the better for your case. That's it.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you all the audience. We have already uploaded our season 2 Minimalist Corporate Lifestyle series on the website. You can follow us on LinkedIn. We have emailed to you. If your emails are not registered with us, please write to us on jbbacademy@jbbodamail.com and we will respond back to you. The questions that has not been answered here today, we will come back to you. If you have any more questions, please do let us know. If you have any topics that you want us to discuss on this forum, please do let us know. And thank you for all the support and the encouragement. Please share our videos of this webinar that we will be uploading very soon in time to come on YouTube as well as on LinkedIn. Follow us and like us. Thank you so much and have a good evening. Stay safe. Be safe.